Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth reviews of just about every indie game we can get our hands on, and today we're going to be taking a look at Apple Slash for the Nintendo Switch. And if you, like so many oral hygienists, are nursing a secret fear of apples, then I apologize for nothing. Because with a story as deep and immersive as an apple cart boy seems to be lost in a murky swamp, I mean, how could you not be enthralled? But while I can't even say that with a straight face after rehearsing a couple times, it actually is a pretty fun experience, so don't write it off just yet. Apple Slash may, in all reality, have a fairly weak story, but in all reality, it doesn't need one that's too terribly immersive or in-depth, because it combines the two amazing genres of top-down adventure, Zelda-like, with a hack and slash. And while arguably the main driving force behind the gameplay is the combat hack and slash element, the flavor of the adventure portion isn't entirely lost, and honestly there is a bit of nuance to the game. Set in a largely monochromatic environment, you'll be playing through this adventure with a few puzzles to solve and a few people to help. And for some unknown reason, these mobs are constantly spawning around your otherwise peaceful village. And while you span from one edge of the map searching for the game's 4 hidden keys to the game's arguably not so hidden gate, you'll be discovering new abilities and new powers that, one of the coolest things is that they're not just used for map navigation, most of them can be used in combat. But the best part, and one of the things that does take, as I mentioned before, a bit of nuance, is the fact that a lot of these abilities can not only be combined, but strung together. And as combat does get fairly frantic with rapidly respawning enemies that'll actually repopulate areas while you're still in them, the feeling of wave combat becomes a very active pressure that's going to require you to get really, really good with the combat system of the game. But an interesting thing is that you probably don't actually have to use any of the game's special abilities other than map navigation if you really don't want to. And that's because an objectively lowbrow level of button mashing is actually encouraged by the basic attack spam. And in all reality and experience in my own personal playthrough, as fast as you can mash the attack button, you will be attacking the enemies. But all attacks in the game are subject to a bit of a twin stick mechanic, meaning that you're going to be controlling your character with one thumbstick and controlling the directionality of your attack with the other. And as enemies will constantly be swarming towards you and respawning in the same screen if you take even a little bit too long to get out of the way, you really can't just breeze through and mash the R trigger. You will have to pay constant attention to enemy spawns, enemy movement, as well as enemy ranged attacks, all while possibly losing track of your own character's sprite in the absolute insane flurry and flashes of attacks and deaths, in the massive melee that is known as Apple Slash. Overall, though, the game is incredibly simple, and while there are a few larger skirmishes that might push you to your breaking point, there are only a couple of quests and maybe 2 puzzles, and the entire game resolves itself into one single giant boss fight. And so as you might be guessing already, Apple Slash is particularly short. But looking at it graphically, for what it is as a hack and slash game, it actually has a pretty good presentation. And it does give me some reminiscence back to games like Gato Roboto or even Luca Born of a Dream, with its nearly monochromatic expression as well as its furious pencil line scratches for its attacks. And for such a short game with such a shallow depth, I actually was surprised to find out that the audio package of the game is pretty well developed. There really isn't a huge complement of enemies, and even though you do gain some abilities, there's not much room for diversity in the audio there. But every element of the game does have its own sound effects, and you can tell that the audio designer really put a lot of effort into the soundtrack itself. And so while it was a particularly straightforward and very short experience, I'd have to say arguably it was a really satisfying one. But as there is no game that is above critique, there are a few things a player might want to consider before investing their time or their money into Apple Slash. And first and foremost would be the length of the game, as I've already mentioned several times. Apple Slash is inarguably a short game, and even the developers themselves say it might take you between 30 minutes or an hour depending on how much you personally choose to explore. And in my own personal playthrough, it took me around 47 minutes. But I did re-explore the entire map twice just to make certain that I wasn't missing anything. And so this is one of those thoughtful indie games that I would probably classify as a micro indie. And one of the major considerations for that specific genre is if you can beat it on your lunch break and still make it back to work in time, it's probably a micro indie. Other than that, though, is the consideration that Apple Slash does leave itself very openly open to a sequel. And so in that sense, while the final boss fight is certainly fairly challenging, you probably will be left wanting more, which is good because, again, I researched and the developer said that Appleslash was kind of just an experiment to test out some game theory and help develop some nuances of specific mechanics for a much larger project coming later. So for a couple of bucks, I was more than happy to support. And so I'd have to say, pushing back and looking at Appleslash as a whole experience, it was satisfying, and honestly it was really fun, but it is terribly short. And so if you're just looking for a fun, simple indie game, a new adventure, or just something to kind of vent some steam with some mindless button mashing, then it might be exactly what you're looking for, especially while it's currently on sale. But anyway, that does about wrap up the review of Appleslash, now on the Nintendo Switch. So if you enjoyed the review, or especially if you found it helpful, feel free to throw us a comment or a like to show your support, and don't forget to click that little bell icon when you subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. Because there are thousands of indie games out there, and new and unique ones are coming out literally every single day. And as we are putting out 2 reviews a week on both Mondays and Fridays, whether it's an easy hard pass or an absolutely unforgettable gem, chances are if it's on the eShop, you're going to find out about it right here. But anyway, this has been The Budget Gamers. As always, thanks for watching.